Good afternoon and welcome to AP European History with Mr. Bovey. Today we'll be discussing Chapter 27, The Great War, specifically Section 3, The Russian Revolution, and this is going to turn out to be a very important and significant part of your exam. We'll be using the McKay, Hill, and Buckler text, 7th edition, as always, and need to get some things down. We'll periodically throw some questions in there that may be on your test. The fall of the Imperial Russia. And we've talked about this in class. Tsar Nicholas II was rather inept as a leader. And Russia's unified for a moment when World War I begins, because all parties involved are in agreement, just like much of Europe, that there's a little excitement going to war, and they feel very confident. Germany quickly changes this. Quick barrages of artillery inflict major loss, and in the first year of war, there are over 2 million casualties suffered by the Russian people. Tsar Nicholas II is a poor leader. He doesn't trust this Duma or legislature. It was more of a band-aid to kind of appease the people, because he still firmly believed, or at least his wife Alexandra believed, that he should maintain an absolute monarchy. He was very naive and sheepish, and was really not suited for all of the problems that were ahead. It would have been very tough to navigate even for a skilled leader. Nicholas travels to the front lines to avoid calls for reform in government. And this is where the problems really start to begin, as if they hadn't been just plugging holes for the last 10 years. His wife, Alexandra, is a German heiress, and her counselor, Rasputin, who is a self-proclaimed monk, are in charge of the government when he leaves for the front lines. And this turns out to be very detrimental. Alexandra is much more hard-lined and firmly believes in absolutism and has no basis for being in touch with the people who are starving to death in masses. And Rasputin, the degenerate, was self-proclaimed. He was a self-proclaimed monk, and he was trusted because he could heal her hemophiliac son Alexei, presumably with hypnotism. The government slid more and more towards revolution. Rasputin is murdered by high officials, and in March, women march on Petrograd calling for bread, one of the many revolutions that are going to come as we move toward the overthrow of Nicholas. The Duma declares a provisional government on March 12, 1917, and 3 days later, Tsar Nicholas II abdicates, and that is the end of Russian monarchy. So what do we do now? There's a provisional government. Most people experience more freedom and were excited about the future. Socialist Alexander Kerensky becomes the prime minister in July, and the Duma is to share power with the Petrograd Soviet, and Soviet is a council. And it was powerful workers and soldiers which constantly weakened and undermined the provisional government's authority. And at this time, there are Soviets or councils all over Russia, essentially. But the Petrograd Soviet is really the strongest or the key here. They issue Army Order Number 1, which is mentioned in your text. And this is very, very detrimental to the war effort, because basically, without the Duma's approval, they issue this Army Order Number 1. And it's issued to prevent a military coup. They're terribly afraid of the military just overthrowing either the Soviet or the provisional government. It instead creates a total collapse in army discipline, because all of the officers are stripped of their titles, putting power in the hands of the common soldier. And it's just a major setback for the people. A couple of questions on your test that have to do with Russia, are specifically dealing with Allied intervention during the Russian Civil War. What else do we have here? The Petrograd Soviet's Army Order Number 1. I hope you'd get that one if you're listening to this. The 1905 revolution, we revert back to that. Remember, you were supposed to keep those notes from chapter 25. Specifically, a question about the provisional government and why it failed. Rasputin comes up. So quite a few things that we've already talked about and covered. Lenin and the Bolsheviks, and this is where Vladimir Ulyanov Lenin emerges. He studies Marxism, He's going to always hate the Russian government because his brother is executed there, and he's eventually exiled for being an agitator in Siberia. And after his being freed from exile, he flees to Western Europe for 17 years and religiously and passionately studies Marxism. Lenin's ideas are similar in many ways, but also have some key differences. He believes revolution must be violent, just like Marx. Under certain conditions, revolution was possible in a more backward country, however, and this means that not a working class like Marx says you must have, but that it's possible under the right conditions to do it with peasants, and that's really where Lenin differs from Marx. Lenin also feels that the revolution is determined more by the leadership of an elite group, and this is where he establishes the Bolsheviks, who are a highly disciplined workers' party. Okay, the Bolsheviks being the majority and the Mensheviks being the minority of communists, they all get together. Membership in the party is exploding in Russia, but it breaks apart because Lenin's ideas are a little too extreme for some people in the party. And all of this is happening outside of Russia by all kinds of people who have escaped Russia and escaped threat of being deposed of by the Tsar for being a threat to the country. Germany is who safely escorts Lenin back into Russia in hopes of him going there and undermining their war efforts. And this is something that he does very, very successfully. So right now in Russia, we've got this provisional government with a parliament, and they're somewhat working with the Petrograd Soviet. And then we have what's called the Kornilov affair. And General Kornilov was a lion-hearted, well-respected general. He submits an attack on the provisional government, and this allows Alexander Kerensky to ask the Bolsheviks to come back and to actually help him when they had just been sent away for trying to undermine the provisional government's authority. So the army is put down. Some of the army is put down that are attacking the provisional government, and the Bolsheviks are reinstated and free in Russia, and this is going to turn out to be a major turning point. Leon Trotsky is another person mentioned in your text. He's a brilliant military leader and diplomat for the Bolsheviks, and he convinces the Petrograd Soviet to overthrow the provisional government and make Lenin the head of the new government. Okay? And the Bolsheviks take this opportunity to seize power, and there are many reasons for this. Specifically, democracy had given way to anarchy. Okay, the power was there to be taken. Lenin and Trotsky were just superior leaders to anybody else that was leading any kind of a party in Russia. And many workers and soldiers believed in the cause and were exhausted by war. And we'll come to find out in following chapters that those workers are going to soon be very disappointed when they realize that it's just another dictatorship that they're about to be a part of. Lenin approves peasant uprisings when he gets into power. The ironic thing is these peasant uprisings were already taking place. He just states that they're okay. And the peasants are really doing Lenin's bidding for him and kind of weeding out some of the people that he might see as a threat. He desperately pushes to get out of war. He doesn't want any attacks from Germany. And he feels that at any cost is not too high of a price to pay to get out. So he pushes for, and Russia agrees to, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1918, which gets Russia out of the war, but they pay heavy reparations. They lose about a third of their population, which is very detrimental, but it allows Lenin to move toward his ultimate goal of seizing political power in Russia. He promises a freely elected constituent assembly, but this backfires because the Bolsheviks only receive about a quarter of the representatives. The Constituent Assembly meets for one day and then is dismissed with the Bolsheviks and Bolshevik soldiers seizing power. And this leads everybody to the realization of impending dictatorship and civil war. And this civil war is going to last for approximately 3 years. It's going to be the whites, okay, the people from the provisional government, basically anybody who was not a Bolshevik or communist versus the reds, okay? Lenin and the Reds win this war, although it was tough going for a while. Strategically, they controlled the center. That's a big reason for this. The whites were disunited because they're from many, many different groups, and they're always on the fringes, outside looking in. They were not defined politically, and simply the Reds had a better army, directed by War Commissar now Leon Trotsky. The Reds instituted war communism, which was a type of a total war application to civil conflict. And they created revolutionary terror from the Cheka, or secret police. And the Cheka kind of spied and hunted down and killed thousands of people, creating some difficult situations within Russia. And thus ends the Civil War. And as we continue into chapter 28, we'll continue the saga as we move from Lenin to Stalin. And this is really a big part of the reason why the World War I, along with the Russian Revolution, perhaps this era and time, we see some of the most significant changes in all of world history.